Okay guys, today we are going to do a multi-phase form using JavaScript and HTML. Okay, so we're going to build a multi-phase form. Let us you see what it actually means, or you see what the end result is going to look like. If you know how programs are being installed, and they have kind of different phases in which when you click next it goes to the next phase and things like that. So in this case we are trying to build a multi-phase form. Let's say for instance you're building an application which requires a lot of user input, right? So let's say you have like let's say you have like 30 form inputs, and you cannot just bulk them into the user for the user to just enter everything alone, right? For the user to just enter every input. So what we want to do is we want to give it in various stages, like for instance the personal information, parent information and stuff like that. Okay, so let's get into the code and see what it gives. I'll create a new file called I'll say multiphase multiphase.html. Okay, and I'll open my HTML tag, and for the title I'll say multiphase form using JavaScript. Okay, now we are not going to focus our mind on the CSS because this is not actually a CSS tutorial. Okay, so we'll just build an HTML form, just pure HTML with JavaScript, since the main thing which we are focused on is JavaScript. So I'll build the various stages. Let's say we want 4 stages, right? 4 stages, and in the first stage, let's say we have 4 stages, and in the first stage we want to collect the user's information, right? So I'm going to create a div, and I say stage 1. In this stage I'm going to collect the user's full names, username, password, email and phone number, right? So collect the full name. Come on, what's happening? Full name text is, and here we have full name, the ID is full name, right? So this name, actually, if you've been using PHP or other server-side languages, so that this name is what will be used or what will be called using our server-side language. But we are more focused on the ID because JavaScript is going to get the ID of this form and get the value. Okay, so we have full name, and I also want to put a span tag, right, in which I'll be reporting any errors concerning this input field. So it means if we are validating and there are some errors, we want to populate it inside the span elements. Okay, and I want this span element to have a color of red so that our validation should show red. Let me just show you what I'm trying to say. If I write in anything inside, let's say my name, Ebune Joseph, or let me say error, and we open in a browser. My computer is slow. Okay, open it on a browser, you see the error, right? You get what I'm trying to say, the red text showing error. So we want to populate all our messages and we want them to show in red. Okay, I'll remove that because I don't want to put them there at the moment. Okay, so I'll put a break tag, and I copy these codes 4 times, right? Since I want to put input field for the username, too much space, input field for the username, For the username, passwords, email, and phone number, right? So we have username, our full name, username, the ID is username, and the name is username, right? The name is username. Now for this we have the passwords. The name is passwords since we want to get it that way, and the ID is password, and we'll say passwords error. Now mind you, these IDs will be targeted using JavaScript and will be populated, right? Even with all of these values or all of these text input will be targeted using JavaScript with this ID and will be handled using JavaScript. Okay, so you will see what I'm trying to say. Username, password, and we have email address. Here is email, and we'll say email error. And finally we have number. Okay, so here will be number, and number error. We'll just put another break tag and a horizontal line. So let us see what we've got. Okay, everything is looking good and okay. Everything is looking okay, and let's just attach an H1 here saying stage 1 of 4. Let's just put what? Stage 1 of 4, so the user knows the number of stages which are available and the stage in which he is currently. Okay, this is for stage 2. I'll write the comment and say stage 2 starts here. I'll create another div and say stage 2. In this stage 2, let's say I'll just get the age and the subject, right? The age and so I'll just say input type. Now for this example, I'm not going to use a radio button, right? You can put a radio button and experiment on it, but I'm not going to put a radio button. I'll just use it this way, right? Just use an input. So I'll say age, and we have a span tag with an ID called age error, and a style with a color of white. Let's add one more. Let's say address, right? The person's address, the user's address. So I'll say text, the name is address, the ID is address, a break tag, a span with an ID of address error, and also a style of color white. Okay, that is that for the second stage, right? I'll put the next comment and say third stage ends here, or starts here rather, starts here, and I'll say stage 3. Create a div called stage 3, and in stage 3 I just need a message, right? So I just say message text area, since it's a text area field. We want the ID to be message, the name should be message, we want rows of 10 and columns of 10, right? A break tag and our span to populate any errors associated to this. So say message error with a color of white. Okay, and finally we have the last stage. Oh, forgetting this, stage 3 of 4, and this should be stage 2 of 4, and finally the last stage. We'll say last stage, and we'll create a div, right? We'll create a div called stage 4. Now for this last stage, what we want to do is we want to populate all the information that has been entered by the various stages to the user, so that the user can actually confirm and see if all information has been entered correctly, right? So basically we'll just say put it on h1 stage 4 of 4, and in this stage we'll just load everything in a paragraph tag, right? So just say pop pop full name for the ID, and let us see how many fields do we have. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, right? So I'll copy and paste this 7 times for the various fields. 3 7. Now I want to pop the full name, the username, the password. Pop full name, username. I'll use camel casing. Pop username, pop email. Now we are not going to pop the password, okay, because the password is a sensitive information. So pop age, pop address, and pop message. Now everything entered on all those stages will be populated in this stage 4, right? And finally we'll have our submit button. Input type submit with a value called submit form. Now if we refresh and see, we have our necessary information, everything is okay, but it's lacking this horizontal line for each stage, and we need to enclose all of this in a form, right? Everything has to be enclosed in a form because we need to submit this data. So what I'll do is I'll put the horizontal lines first, then later put in the form. It was a silly mistake, so I'll say horizontal line, put a break tag, horizontal line. Let's see. Now everything is okay, but we need to enclose all of this in a form, because if we click on this submit, the data goes nowhere because it's not actually in a form, right? So we need to enclose all of this in a form. So say form, I'll copy this and paste it below, being the last thing, and I make sure I indent this properly. Okay, now a form has, our form will have a method called get. We want to use the get method with an action. Now I want to say when our validation is okay, I want to submit this data to let's say PHP, right, in order to save this data to the database. So we'll say register, submit it to a file called register.php, in which we'll create later. And we will say, since we'll use JavaScript to actually manipulate this, we'll use an onSubmit, right? on submit events, I would say return what function can I say process form, right? That's the name of the function. Now this function has not been created yet, so we'll create it in a minute. It is this function so what we're saying is on submit, which means once this data has been submitted, we should process this function, right? We should call this function in our JavaScript and execute all the statements which are involved in that. Now if we look closely, we'll see that we want to display one form at a time, but we need a button that goes to the next stage, a button that goes to this next stage, a button that leads from this stage to this stage, right? So we need to add that. So I will say button with a type of button, because by default a button has a type of submit. So we don't want to submit this data instantly. We want to just validate everything and move to the next stage, right? And I'll call an ID and say btn stage 1, right? That's the name of the button, and I'll say next. Go to the next. I'll do same for this, and I'll say btn stage 2 next, btn stage 3 next, and finally our submit button, right? So we have the various button next, 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 which means once this has been validated, we'll move to the next stage. Once this has been validated, we'll move to the next stage, and finally once everything has been populated here, we submit the form to our register.php, right? Okay, now what we want to do is we want to make it in a multi-phase, which means we're actually going to show one stage at a time, right? One stage at a time. So we don't want to show stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. At when the page just refreshes, we want to see just this first stage, right? Stage 1. And once all the data has been validated correctly, we can prompt the user to go to the next stage, right? So we'll write a simple CSS embedded style sheet. So I'll say style, and I want to target from stage 2, since I want just this one to show, this first div. I'll have to target stage 2, 3, and 4, right? I want to target these 4 divs and hide them, right? So what I'll do is I'll say hatch, paste it. The next div, stage 4, right? So I'm using my CSS property to target all of these divs. It's targeting stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, right? So when you target it, I'll say give a display property of none, don't show, right? At this instance we want just the first stage, so don't show, right? Let me see. Stage 2 is an ID. We have stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4 with an ID. Stage 4. Oh, it's a semicolon here. So I say target all of that and show us just the first stage. Okay, everything is looking sweet. So I think that is all for the HTML section. I want us to go into the JavaScript section. So basically what I'll do is I'll create another file which will be linked, right? Will be linked to this. So I'll create a file called I'll create a file, a JavaScript file. It's a script. So say script type text/JavaScript, and the source I'll say app.js. Okay, now app.js, I need to create this file. I'll create a file called app.js, right, in which I'm going to write my JavaScript functions here. Now let me test and see if my JavaScript communicates with my HTML. Say hello, this worked. Okay, if I refresh and I see this worked, it means my JavaScript has been linked. Okay, so I'll remove that out. I want to see my both screens, so I'll go to my view and split my layout, right. I want to see two columns, and I'll drag this JavaScript here, put this JavaScript here so that I can see my HTML easily and my JavaScript easily. Let me shift this a little bit. Okay, now the first thing we need to create is our onSubmit, our process form function, right. So I'll create a comment and say this function will process and submit data to PHP, and I'll create this function. This function has a name called process form, right, and it takes in no argument, so I'll move that. Okay, now I'm not going to touch this form now because we are not going to process, we are not submitting the form at the first instance, because at this stage the first thing we are going to do is, once the user enters this information, he needs to click on next, and next doesn't actually submit this information, right. It doesn't submit the information. So I'll call an event and say whenever this button is being clicked, do some validations on this first stage, and once every validation is okay, move to the next stage, right. So I'll say on click, call an on click event, and I'll say process stage 1 long function. Yeah, I'll create this function in my JavaScript. I'll say function to process stage 1, and I'll create the function. Let me reduce this so that you see very well. Okay, now okay, now I want to create my super function. Rather than me writing document.getElement by ID all the time, I want to create a function that actually holds that information, right. So I'll say super function that holds DOM. I'll create the function and say underscore, right, X. Now what I'll do is I'll say return document dot get element by ID, and whatever ID that will be passed will be received by this X, right, and we'll pass it to this. So say document dot get element by ID X, which means if a user enters a string here, let's say Joseph, right, let's say Joseph, this function will say document dot get element by ID Joseph, which means it would come to our HTML and look for any ID named Joseph, right. So it's just a variable, we'll be passing in strings there. So let me uncomment that. Okay, everything is looking sweet. Now I'll need to create my global variables, right. Since we have many functions processing stage 1, another function processing stage 2, another function processing stage 4, and all the rest, We don't want our variables to be declared inside here because we need to access them inside another function, right? We actually need to handle them in another function. So we'll create our global variables that holds all our information, right? All our form input. So we'll say global variables, and I'll say var full name. Since we want our full name, we have a username, we have a password, an email, number, address, message, and age. Right, I've declared my variables that will hold this form input, right? My variables that will hold that form input. Now what I'll do is I'll say I want to get now every input entered by the user, right? Inputs entered by the user. So I'll say full name or target this variable, right? I want to give this variable a value. So I'll say this variable get, which is document.get element by id, get the id of full name, right? So get the value of full name, get the id of full name, and whenever someone enters something, give me that value entered by the user, right? So give me the value. Let us alert this and see if it works, right? So say alert full name, alert full name, and if I refresh the form and enter anything, let's say Bunet Joseph, my name, and submit, it should give the name entered by the user, right? So what actually happens is when you click on this button, the next button, when you click on this next button, it fires up this function, right, called process stage 1, right? It fires up this function, and what this function actually does is it gets the id of this name input field, right? It gets the id of this name and gives the value, right, entered by the user. So that is that. So if that works, it means we can get the username, password. So let me get the username, say underscore username, since the id is called username, right? Underscore username dot value. I also want to get the passwords. I'll say document dot get element by id passwords dot value. I've gotten the passwords. We have username, password, email. Okay, now the next thing is the email. Email dot value. I'm getting all the user information entered. Number, the id is number, right? So document the get element by id, get this number id and give the value. Okay, that is that, right? Make sure your variables you've declared here should be the same as the one you're using here, right? So that you have no errors, right? Make sure it is the same. Now I will not want to submit, let's say for instance a user enters an empty input field, right, and clicks on submit, as the user doesn't enter any information. I'll not want to process this data empty fields and submit it to PHP, right? So I want to do some validations on it. Now I'll want the number, the full name to be entered. It must be entered. It's a required field. We need the person's full name, right? And the full name should not be lesser than 4 characters. We'll do same for username, password, email, and make sure the number is also required, right? The user enters an information But if the user enters anything like a string here, we should reject it, right? We should reject it and say an information cannot be entered here. Why is not the other cannot? Right? Okay. Okay. Now we want the full name, right? So say validate full name. For our validation for the full name, we want a user to enter an information inside here, right? We want the information to be filled compulsorily. We also want the characters, or a username should not be lesser than 3 characters, right? Should not be lesser than 5 characters. A username, a full name should not be lesser than 5 characters, and it should not be made up of numbers, right? Someone cannot have a name called 24242424, right? So it should not be made up of numbers. So let's proceed with that. Or passing a condition and say if, removing the else part, I'll say if the full name entered by the user is equal to an empty string, right? Because we don't want empty strings, and we don't want numbers, right? There's a JavaScript function called is not a number, right? Is not a number, which means this actually checks for a string, but we want to check if, come on, but here we want to check if it is a number, right? It's not a string, actually checks if it's not a number. I beg your pardon. It's not a number means it is a string, right? It means you're checking if it is a string. But now we don't want to check if it is a string. What we want to check is if it is a number, right? So what we do is, let me enclose this first. What we do is we say if it's not a string, which means if it is a number. So if full name is a number, right? If full name is a number, or full name, come on, or full name dot length, right? Or full name dot length is lesser than or equal to 5 characters. So we are trying to say that if the full name entered by the, because with JavaScript we can get the length of a number or a length of a string, right? Which means if a user enters this, JavaScript can count the number of characters in this string, right? So in this case there are 7 characters, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So there are 7 characters, right? Now we want a user to enter his full name to be greater than 5 characters, right? To be greater than 5 characters and not less than 5 characters. That's what I'm saying. If the full name dot length is lesser than 5, we should throw an error, right? We should throw an error. So what we'll do is we are going to target this span field and give our error, because that's the purpose for this span field, right? So I'll say underscore give me the ID of the full name error and populate it in JavaScript. We say inner HTML, right, to give in a value, to write in a value in between HTML tags, right? So to write in a value in between HTML tags, I'll say inner HTML, and I'll say full name has some issues, make sure it is greater than 5 Let me reduce this. Make sure it is greater than 5 characters and does not contain numbers. Very long. Okay. And finally, we want to say return false, which means stop processing and throw this error on the screen, right? Okay, let us test if that actually works. If I leave this field empty and I click on next, it should say full name has some issues, and make sure it is greater than 5 characters and does not contain numbers, right? Now if I refresh and I put in numbers, it should also give the same error, right? That should not contain that. But if I write in my name, not just my name but a name which has, this is more than 5 characters, right? If I click next, no error appears, right? An error doesn't appear because everything is validated successfully, right? Everything is okay. Now I want to do same for username, password and email, right? So just follow along. So say username validation. I'll do same. I'll say if since I'll be testing two conditions, I'll put in my square brackets like that, and I'll say if username is equal to empty string, or the username dot length, that's the length of the username, is lesser than or equal to 3, we want to target the username error field, right? So I named it username error, and I'll populate it with a message called username. I'll give a short message this time. Username has some errors, and return false. Okay. I'll do same for the passwords and the email, right? Passwords validation. Now a password can be made up of numbers and strings and characters and symbols. So the only thing we're going to check for this password is to see if the password is empty, right? So if the password is empty, we'll say target our password error field, password error, and populate it with a message. Say password is empty, please enter your password, and return false. Email. Now for email, right? Now for email, I don't want the user to enter at gmail.com, right? Or the person just enters his name. Now I want to make sure at, right? Arrobas in French. So say at, this sign should be present in the email, right? This sign should be present in the email, and the email field should not be empty, right? The email field should not be empty. So what I'll do is I'll say email dot, we have a function called index of, right? Index of at should not be lesser than or equal to 0, which means if the person starts with an index called, let's say if the person starts with an index in programming, this is an array of strings, right, or an array of characters, and arrows or this sign has an index of 0, right? G has an index of 1, M has an index of 2, A has an index of 3, and all the rest. So we are saying if the index is equals to or lesser than 0, throw an error, right, and say the email format is not correct, right? I'll enclose this in double quotes, and I also want to check and make sure it is not empty, right? So if the email field is empty, want to target the email error span tag and load it with some error messages. So say email is not valid. Now this is just a basic way of validating email, right? In a subsequent tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to pass in patterns, right? How to check against patterns to make sure the email has correct patterns, right? So just bear with me. This is just for beginners, right? Just for beginners. And finally, I want to check for numbers. So I'll say number validation, and I'll say this else statement keeps coming. I'll check against the number validation. I want to make sure the number is not empty. So it means if the number is empty and let's say the user enters a string, right? Like I told you guys, is not a number. Is not a number means it is a string, right? If something is not a number, it means it's a string. So we're saying if it is not a number, it means if the person enters a string instead of a number, we should give an error message. Say number error and pass in the message, right? We'll say number field is required and must contain numbers only. Return false. Okay, I forgot return false here. Okay, so that is that for this, which means if I enter a right name and let's say I enter a username with 4 characters, right, or 2 characters, let's say 3, and I submit, you should say username has some errors, right? You should give that error. Now if I enter a right username and let's say I enter a right password, but the email starts with at gmail.com, and I submit, it should say email is not valid, right? Email must be valid, which means if I enter a valid email, a valid name, a valid username, a valid password, and the number is made up of strings or letters, it should throw an error and say number field is required and must contain numbers only, right? Now our validations are all okay and sweet. This is our JavaScript file, right? Once this validation is okay, we want to make sure that if everything is okay, if the user enters the right information, and the user clicks on this next, this stage, right, should go off because we are done with this stage. This stage should go off and the next stage should show, right? So we'll process that. Let me see. End of process stage 1 function. This is the end of the function. Let me make sure it is okay. It's the end, right? And I want to write everything inside that function. Now I'll say disappear, not the right word, but say disappear stage 1 view, and I'll say show stage 2 view, right? To actually use our CSS property to style that, since in our HTML we give a CSS property called display none, right, for stage 2, stage 3 and stage 4. We want to override this our style sheet and give a display property of block, right, for it to show, and we want to show just one stage at a time, right, the next stage, and we make sure we hide the current stage. Make sure we hide the current stage. So what I'll do is hiding the current stage. I mean, hide stage 1, right? For me to hide the current stage, I'll need to target the ID, right, of that current stage, and we gave it an ID called stage 1. I'll need to target this ID using my document.getElement by ID, get the ID and pass in a style, right, to hide it. So I'll copy that and say document.getElement by ID, my superclass, right, stage 1, right. Let me make sure I'm copying the right thing. Stage 1, okay. I'll say stage 1 document.getElement by ID. We want to get the ID, right, and want to pass in a style for that particular div, right. We want to pass in a style, so we'll say dot style, right. And what type of style do you want to pass? You want to pass in a display property or a display style. So say document.getElement by ID dot style dot display equals none, right, like what we did for stage 2, stage 4, excuse me. So we'll hide it, and when we hide it, we want to show the next stage, right, and the next stage is stage 2. We want to show this next div, right, this next div. We want to show stage 2, right, show all this form information. So say document.getElement by ID stage 2, the style with a display property of block, and that is all, right, for this function. Let me reduce the space. So that is all for this function, okay. So if I refresh and I make sure I pass in the right information, we set our username should not be lesser than 5 characters. This is more than the password should not a password like this, a valid email. We need to hide this password field, or come back to it. A valid number, I will say passing let me not pass it, I just 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and when I submit, wow, it goes to the next stage, right, because everything is okay. It goes back, or it goes forward to the next stage. Everything, it's working sweet. Okay, that is for so that is for this process stage 1 function, right. So we need to do same for stage 2, just basically same, right. So make sure we target our, go back to our HTML and we'll write a button, right. We'll give it an on click event. When this next stage is clicked, we'll call another function, right, and we can name this function process stage 2, which will process this stage 2 data, right. Set stage 2, okay, which will process this stage 2 data, right. And I want to make sure my password is password. It should not be showing this blank or the name of the password in which I've written, right. It should not be, means when I write my password, it should show like this. Okay, process stage 2. This file is becoming bulky. Let me zoom out a little bit so that I can see very well, right? And reduce some space. Reduce some space. We'll need our work to be neat. Now I'll need to create this process stage 2 function, right? I want to create this process stage 2 function for our stage 2, which means when this button is being clicked, stage 2, when the button is being clicked, I need to pass in an on-click event, right? So when the button is being clicked, we'll say process stage 2. Did I first write this? Oh, I'm feeling as if I wrote it. Okay, process stage 2, right? And I'll create this function. Function receives nothing. Now for this function we are receiving age and address. Mind you, we have created all our variables, right? Our super global variables, right? Age and address, which can be accessed by any function, right? Can be accessed by any function. So I want to get the value entered by this user. I'll say age. I want to get the value, so I'll say age equals document that get element by id. The id is age, and the value, right? I'll do same for address. And we get the value entered by the user. Now I want to validate, like what we did previously. I want to validate the age, right? The age should not be made up of the person should not write someone could write 93, but it will be too much, right? So we want our age to be made up of numbers, right? So it's the age validation. Actually, it should be made up of numbers and required, right? It should be made up of numbers and it is required. So I'll say if just totally the same thing. So you see, JavaScript is kind of easy for this basic level, right? It's kind of easy. So say age, if the age is equals to an empty string. Now, like I always say, we always include this, since we are comparing two conditions, right? Always includes that, so that we don't conflict, or we don't have any errors. I'll say if the age is equals to 0, or the age is made up, if the person enters a string instead of numbers, we should give an error, right? If the person enters a string instead of numbers, so we say if is not a number, age. If the age is not a number, we want to target our age ID and report our error, right? Dot value, dot inner HTML, and say age must be integers only, right? And we return false, which means the form has some issues. I'll do same for address. So I'll say address validation, not validation and I'll pass in a condition also for the address. I want to check if the address is empty, and that is all, right? Let's just make it simple. You already know the basics. So I'll say if the address is equals to an empty string, I'll target the address error field and populate it with information saying address is not valid and return false. Excuse me. Now that is all for stage 1, right? If everything works well, we want to hide current or hide stage 2 and show stage 3. We are done, right? And I'll target the stage 2 ID, right, in order to hide it. So I'll say document.get element by ID dot style. I want to give a style with a display property of none. The display property of none, and I want to show stage 3, right? I want to display stage 3, so target the ID of stage 3 and say star dot display property equals block, and that is that, right? So let us test and see if everything works. We already know stage 1 works, so I'll pass in data, writing a password, an email address, a number, and let me see if I write in letters it should give an error. Okay, right, but if I write in, let's say 23, the address, I'll give my address and I click on next, it goes to the next stage, right? Everything is working sweet at the moment. Okay, this is almost getting done, right? Let me put say end of process stage 3 function, and I'll give a space here so that everything works. Okay, now we are going, it says show stage 3, right? So we'll come to stage 3 and say when the message has been entered, validate it and click on next, right? And in this next button we're going to call process stage 3 function, as simple as that, right? Process stage 3 function, process, not stage 3 function, but process stage 3 function, right? Now inside process stage 3 function, want to get is just the message, right? Just the message, and just the message. I'll say message dot value, right? Once I've gotten the message, we want to validate message, right? Validate message. I want to make sure message is not empty, and come on, the and sign, and the length is not lesser than 10 characters, right? So that's what we want to test. So we'll say if message is equals to empty, which means if it is empty we'll throw an error, right? I keep forgetting these brackets. If the message is empty, or the message length is lesser than or equals to 10 characters. We want a long message, right? If it is lesser than or equals to 10 characters, we want to target the message error field, right? Message error field, and say inner HTML message must be longer than 10 characters. put a semicolon there and say return false, right? So we're targeting this message error field. Where is it? Message error field, right? And we'll pass in our message there. Okay, everything is looking sweet. Now if the validation is okay, we want to move to the next stage, right? So I'll say hide stage 3 and show us and show stage 4, right? And show us the next stage. So I'll target stage 3. So I'll say document.getElement by id stage 3. We'll do the same thing as we have been doing. It's now a hobby. Right, and we want to show stage 4, right? We want to show stage 4. Let's make sure it exists. We want to show the next stage, right? I will say the display property should be block. Now let's refresh and go through the form again. So everything works okay. Yeah, password, enter a long password, email address, enter a number, enter age, let's say 40, an address, my address. Let me enter please, I love I am a developer and I love programming, right? Now this is more than 10 characters, right? If we click on next, it goes to the next stage, right? It goes to the next stage, and for the next stage we are not going to create a function, right? We are not going to create a function because the next stage we are just going to submit the data. We are not going to click on another next stage to show whatsoever view, right? We are just going to submit the data. So what I'll do is inside this stage 3, when we hide this current stage and we show the next stage, which means we are under this current stage now, right? We want to load all the data, all the values, right, gotten from all the previous stages, right, into this. We want to load all the data, right, with this id. So what I'll do is I'll say load all user entered information, right? I'll say load all user entered information. Now I want to load the username first, right? I'll say document.getElement by id. Now everything is already there, right? Document.getElement by id, pop username, right, which is this id. We want to populate the username, right? Populate full name, sorry, we want to populate the full name. So we'll target this id and we'll say inner html, as we have been doing. We want to write the id inside here, right? Inner html will be equals our full name variable, right? Because the information has been stored in this full name, right? So we have our full name variable, inner.html full name. That is all, right? We'll do same for username. Let me just copy it or say pop username dot inner html. I want to pass in the username entered in those stages above, right? For the email also, I want to target pop email, targeting this paragraph tag and writing inside, right? So we're targeting the paragraph tag and we want to write inside, right? So what to write is the email entered by the user. That is just all. We also have the number, and we'll say dot inner html equals to the number entered by the user, right? h dot inner html, and we'll pass in our h variable, right? And two more, right? We have the address, right? So load the address, and we pass in the value for the address, right? The value for the address. And finally we have the message entered by the user. We'll target this and enter the message. Now what we have just done is we said once we are on stage 3, right? Process stage 3. So we're saying once everything works well, if the user enters a character or a message and the message length is not lesser than 10, we should hide the current div. We should hide this div, right? We should hide this div and show the next div, right? We should show this next div, and in showing this next div we want to populate the user information, right? We want to populate the full name, the email, the number, the age, address, and message, right? We want to populate everything. So we'll get their ID and pass in the names, right? Since these names has been held by our global variables, we want to pass in those names. And that is all, right? Shockingly, that is all. So let us test it and see if everything works. A longer username, a number, my age should be 45. Let's say I love coding and I love reading books, right? And if I click on next, wow, it gives me my name, my username, email, number, age, address, and the message, right? Now if I click on this information, the file is being submitted to our register.php and the values are being passed, right, using the get method, right? Using the get method. Now that is it, right? Absolutely, that is it, right? That is just all about creating a multi-phase form. Watch out for the next part, which is handling this information using PHP and saving it in the database, right? So don't forget to like just below down here, or you subscribe, right? Like and subscribe. Thanks, right? I'm Ebune Joseph. Thanks once more. Thanks.